Hello and welcome to Filling the Sink, a podcast from Catalan News. My name's Beth Cohen, and today we'll be discussing the trade relationship between the United States and Catalonia. On January the 20th, Donald Trump was once again inaugurated President of the United States. With the new government come new trading policies which will affect America's commercial relationship with Catalonia and are predicted to bring increased tariffs on imports and exports. On this week's podcast, we'll be exploring the changes in legislation and discussing how Catalonia is preparing to cope with this new economic climate. Joining me in the studio are Gerard, Escaich, Folch and Coralie Moreau. Hello.
Hello, Beth. How are you?
Hi, Beth.
Thank you for joining me. Now, to put things into perspective, let's start by listening to an excerpt from the speech that Donald Trump made at his inauguration ceremony on Blue Monday.
I will immediately begin the overhaul of our trade system to protect American workers and families. Instead of taxing our citizens to enrich other countries, we will tariff and tax foreign countries to enrich our citizens.
So it's clear that Trump's coming back to the White House with even more conservative ideas that could have consequences on global trade. Gerard, what changes to trading policies did Trump make during his first mandate?
Well, let's remember that Donald Trump's first mandate was between 2017 and 2021, and he quickly put new tariffs in place especially to counter China, as he claimed it was a direct enemy of the US. And also there were tariffs for EU products here in the European Union, including whiskey and aluminium mainly. And now looking forward to his second term, he's already said that he wants to impose more tariffs, even to up to 60% tariff on Chinese goods. And he also announced increased tariff with Mexico and Canada. So we'll see.
So what consequences did this have last time round?
Well, actually, the last tariffs measures that Trump used, they had a really small impact in reducing the trade deficit of the US. They also didn't really increase growth. So Europe and the UK, they also retaliated by targeting whiskey brands or Harley-Davidson bikes in 2018. They imposed import taxes on a wide range of US products, so including bourbon and whiskeys, for 4 years. But after the US first imposed tariffs on the EU steel and aluminium. In 2022, those tariffs were suspended, which made the US sales increase by 8% in 2023 in the UK and the EU.
Yeah, I know from personal experience that a lot of US products are popular in the UK, so that would have been good news for the end customer, but by the looks of things, it's not going to last.
Well, right now, the suspension has been prolonged until March 2025. But really, without an agreement, the EU plans on imposing a 50% tariff on American spirits again.
Oh no, so no more Jack Daniels for me. And what happened during the Biden administration? Were the policies reversed?
Well, not really. Tariffs were not all taken down by the Biden administration, especially the ones with China. They actually increased. The deal that Trump passed didn't really allow for more American products to be exported to China. So Biden increased the tariffs, especially targeting electric vehicles, solar panels, and batteries. So this is definitely more targeted than what Trump is planning on doing. The consumption of electric vehicles from China is quite low in the US currently. So technically, the consumers should not suffer much from Biden's tariff increase.
Contrary to the non-targeted approach that Trump's taking. So what does Trump hope to achieve with these strong changes in legislation?
Well, it's Make America Great Again, as he always said, and his main idea is to bring back companies back to the US in industries producing steel, cars, and goods. And so we could consider what Trump is doing like traditional protectionism. He wants to increase tariff for companies who are based outside of the US and are selling inside the United States, and with intention of protecting national products.
So America basically produces what it needs and it relies on its own industries as opposed to imported goods.
Exactly, and the problem is that this tariff increase could also reduce competitiveness of Catalan companies, because we have many companies here based in Catalonia who are selling to the United States. And if Donald Trump goes ahead and sets in motion this 10% tariff that he has already warned, And the Catalan government public agency, Acció Trade and Investment Agency, has already estimated that the policy could reduce Catalan GDP by 0.2 points.
Cristina Serradell is the Director of International Trading at Acció, the Catalan government's trade and investment agency. She explains the threat posed to Catalan businesses and how these will need to react and adapt to the new economic circumstances.
There's a great deal of uncertainty because obviously he has talked about putting all these tariffs, general tariffs throughout all products, and about 10 or 12% tariffs for all the goods coming from Europe. This poses a threat for Catalan exporters because it will make exports into the USA more costly. We could recommend that companies analyze their vulnerability, their risk, and see which parts of their business model and of their products are affected, and therefore build different scenarios so they can identify possible strategies in order to adapt to these changing circumstances.
So, Coralie, what consequences could Trump's new policies have, and how do you think that the situation will develop?
Well, these protectionist policies, they affect international trade. But the thing is, they also create inflationist tendencies. So in the end, it will have consequences on Catalan consumption and also economic growth.
That's not really what Spain needs right now, more inflation.
Yeah, really. The Catalan exports to the US, they add up to 3.64 billion euros. Large part of this is machinery, cosmetics, chemical products, or even plastics. So that means that the machinery, food, metal, and chemical industries altogether will be the most impacted by an increase in tariffs.
Thus encouraging Americans to buy national products, which of course is Trump's intention.
Yes. Both imports and exports with the US have significantly increased since 2020. Catalonia's imports have actually increased of 85% since then. So the region heavily relies on raw materials that are imported from the US as well as its energy.
So what's Acció's point of view on this?
Well, Acció points out that the strengthening of the dollar due to these policies could lead to an increase in import prices. And then it will in turn impact the competitiveness of Catalan companies, increasing the price of the product in the end. So that means that the euro will depreciate, and that depreciation could reach 10%.
That's bad news for Europeans who travel to the US or who want to buy US products, because as well as paying increased taxes, we'll also have reduced buying power.
Yeah, and there is also the fact that the impossibility to predict Trump's decisions regarding tariffs and the evolution of relationships between the US and other countries, including Spain, France, the European Union as a whole, or Canada and Mexico, which have been the most targeted according to Trump, could also threaten the stock exchange market. However, what we saw on the first day after Trump's inauguration day, on Tuesday, the 21st, is that stock markets, not only in the US, but also in Europe and Asia, increased, surprisingly to what everyone was expecting, considering the threat of increased tariffs.
And I gather the Bitcoin's boomed since Trump's inauguration. I mean, he's expected to be cryptocurrency friendly, and investment in crypto coins is predicted to be stable and profitable in 2025.
Yeah, on another note, completely another thing to say would be that due to the war in Ukraine, European countries needed to find alternative suppliers of energy, other than Russia, obviously. So Catalonia's main import from the US is fuel, standing at 30% of the overall imports coming from the States.
So the new trading policies could push fuel prices up here in Catalonia?
Yes, that's exactly that, along with other products that Catalonia imports, such as pharmaceutical products.
And the thing is that the policy of protectionism, this America first that Trump has always said, also has a geopolitical dimension. And in fact, a trade war is likely to start between China and the US, but it could also affect the European Union, because we could probably see more Chinese products in the market, in the European market, affecting EU industries.
So as China loses its American clientele, it could look to Europe to compensate.
Yeah, exactly, and that could also force the EU to apply restrictive policies to defend its industry, but also, let's remember, Trump likes to negotiate deals on a one-to-one basis with bilateral agreements, so the European Union has always said that they are gonna negotiate as a whole because that's the union. However, we also know that Donald Trump, for example, is very close with European leaders such as Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni. And we also know that back in Trump's first mandate, the EU had already threatened the US with tariffs. And that's what Jaume Duch, the Catalan Foreign Affairs Minister, said during a radio interview on RAC1 radio station after Trump won.
Let's have a listen.
Poden ser més complicades, sí. Ja van ser complicades durant la primera presidència del Donald Trump. Recordem que això va tensionar molt.
Relations can be very complicated, as in the past, during Donald Trump's first presidency. We must remember that his former policies tensed the relationship with the European Union, mainly on a commercial level. We do not know what impact Donald Trump's new policies will have on Catalan exports. We do not yet know if his promises will be made into regulation.
La relació comercial entre els Estats Units i la Unió Europea és molt forta.
But we know a strong commercial relationship exists between the USA and the EU. The EU is the first commercial partner of the USA, and vice versa. Therefore, if the policy to increase tariffs goes through, the EU has the tools to tackle it.
So given that the EU and the USA are primary trading partners, wouldn't it be in Trump's interest to foster favourable trading conditions?
Yeah, precisely. Engaging in a trade war, that would mean retaliation and escalation of tariffs on certain products. However, Trump doesn't really feel threatened by this because to him, what's important is that the US is behind other countries in terms of trade balance, meaning the US is importing more than it exports.
However, if the US currently depends on foreign imports, wouldn't it be wise for Trump to analyse how much these are needed before compromising his trade relationships?
Yes, you would think so. And even more in our globalized world. An important element here to remember is that in our trade system, most goods exchanges are intermediary goods. So they contribute to the construction of another product or are essential for different products. So increasing tariffs on steel, which Trump did in the previous mandate, that could be profitable for some US companies in the steel sector. But that would eventually harm others down the line and consumers, which would suffer from an increase in prices. To understand better what Donald Trump's mandate will mean for the Catalan and European economies, we talked to Pedro Aznar, Professor of Economics, Finance and Accounting at ESADE Business School.
It's quite likely that one of the things that the administration will do is to increase protectionism, so applying, for instance, quotas or tariffs to EU products. And that might have an effect, a very direct effect, particularly in companies that are exporting to the United States. That means that all companies producing all kinds of goods and services might be worried? Not really, because probably some of these tariffs will target to some industries, okay, like in the past happens with the olive oil or the car industry. But these companies are going to see that because they have an additional cost to enter into the US market, they probably might sell at a higher price, sell less. So if the US market is relevant for them, they are going to have an influence for sure.
With higher tariffs, Catalan and European companies will have to reevaluate the pertinence of exporting to the US and probably pass the price increases on to consumers. But Pedro Aznar says there may be some opportunities for companies too.
Still, there is a way to enter into the US market that is going to be a market that probably, at least for the first period of the term, is going to grow consistently, is going to have good macroeconomic data, and many times you can do that with a local partner there. So there are joint ventures, there are many ways in which a firm can leverage on firms that already are in the United States. So take advantage of a positive economic environment. Then if because of Trump we have a lot of public debt in the United States, volatility in the financial markets, we will see. So we will see in some time. But it's a market that is going to be interesting for companies. So it makes sense to think about ways in which your access to this very relevant market is not banned.
Another point of uncertainty is Trump's general foreign policy, which could negatively impact the European markets and challenge the EU's economic strategy.
For instance, what Donald Trump decides related to Ukraine. And that has an impact not only politically speaking, it also has an impact into the economy. Obviously through energy price, for instance, and volatility of financial markets. Donald Trump doesn't see the EU as a kind of really a relevant player, and that is not good for the EU project. And not in a moment in which we see so many parties that are more focusing on what is happening in the country, so we see that in France, we see that in Germany, than a EU project.
Donald Trump's diplomatic and trade methods require European leaders to keep a united front and maintain an open dialogue.
I think that it's very important to understand how Donald Trump is approaching the President of the United States. And I think that he approached this as he approached businesses. You know, it's not someone that's thinking I have a role in the country. It's like, okay, this is how I run my business. So is everything about negotiation? What are your leverage for negotiation? So if the EU can make some concessions, can negotiate, it's going to be better to a direct confrontation. And I think that already EU politicians know it. It was probably interesting that when it was very clear that he won, you don't see too much criticism from European politicians. They know that it's better to avoid a direct confrontation, try to negotiate.
Thank you, Coralie, for bringing us that report. So what can Catalan and European companies do to minimise the impact of Trump's protectionist policies?
Well, it seems obvious, but obviously we'll need to wait and see, because with Trump, nothing's on plan. He comes up with ideas and with new policies every day. And in fact, according to him, Spain, therefore Catalonia, is part of BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa Association or Union. So technically, as Spain is part of one of those countries, which is not, we would get 100% on tariffs. So as you can see, that's a little bit higher than 10% that he had already threatened with.
Yes. I mean, it's still early days, so I guess we'll just have to see what the future holds. It's important to keep in mind that the US market is very large, so some sectors might be more targeted by the tariffs than others.
Yeah, exactly. So 3,100 Catalan companies export regularly to the US, according to Axio. And for some, the consequences could be more serious than for others. With product differentiation and unique technologies, there could be an advantage for those companies to maintain themselves in the American market. Mm-hmm. In any case, the companies will have to evaluate the pros and cons of maintaining their exports to the US. Because if their competitors rely on the American market as well, then the impact could be reduced. And if the products sent are not the finished products, then the effect on earnings, on profit, could be way less than expected.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's why companies or Catalan companies exporting to the US should think of other strategies, like, for example, assuming the loss in profits, which could prevent the company from losing market share altogether, especially if the situation is only temporary, but also they could open offices or delocalize a portion of their production from like the EU, Catalonia, or wherever the production is, and take it to the US, which is a way of benefiting from tax reductions and protection mechanisms that Trump would put in place to secure employment in the US.
We interviewed Carlos Acedo, a machinery manufacturer, who explains what his strategy is with Trump as the new president of the United States.
Perquè la gran part de la nostra competència també ve d'Europa.
A large part of our concurrence comes from Europe. In a certain way, this measure would increase the price of all the machines of the sector. It wouldn't put us in a situation of disadvantage. If we were to find ourselves in a situation that slows our growth, we could consider the options of moving our assembly line there or building everything there.
Podríem valorar opcions doncs, de passar a fer muntatge en allà o inclús fabricar-la tota en allà.
It looks like the future will bring big changes in commerce. So, Coralie, what other alternatives are there?
Well, another alternative is to look for other markets and other partnerships within the European Union or elsewhere. You could export to Mercosur countries, so the Union of South American countries, India, Southeast Asia. That could be beneficial because those countries are growing rapidly. The European Union is, for example, already looking towards Mexico or Malaysia to export. Actually, the EU even signed a deal with Mexico recently, removing tariffs on food and agricultural products.
Carlos Acedo of Gesame also explains how the increase in the dollar could reduce the impact of such an increase in tariffs.
Preferiríem que el dòlar fos més fort, per tant, per ells comprant euros els hi sigui més econòmic.
We would rather like a stronger dollar for them to buy in euros, which would be cheaper. In any case, a stronger dollar would help us to reduce the general impact of the increase in tariffs.
In short, the inflation that would result from Trump's policies to favour American companies could also minimise the impact of exporting companies in the US.
Yes, so in the end, Trump's trade war against the EU could actually push European leaders to unite economically against Trump's pressure, and it could bring the countries closer together. So it could be an opportunity for the EU to reinforce its expertise in some areas like technologies, cars, or renewable energies. Because in those areas, the EU is actually already leading in research, notably.
Yeah, and also geopolitically, also the EU could benefit from the opportunity of putting forward a common interest, especially with Trump saying that he wants to end the war in Ukraine in the next 6 months, or even like facing the threat of increasing tariff to US imports, so like exports from the EU towards the US. But those challenges could mean that member states here in the European Union could get together and agree on something when some of the times they disagree on other topics. So, for example, including climate change or including energy production, just as Trump has already said that he plans on increasing oil production. Drill, baby, drill, he said. And so the European Union has always said that net zero by 2050. So that means that they would need to completely go against Trump's policies and focus on their research and their resources on reaching renewable energies and producing more clean energy.
In short, Trump's tariffs are set to be higher and more broadly applicable than during his last mandate. And as a consequence, the protectionist measures will trigger inflation and impact Catalan companies' exports. Firms will need to rethink their strategy and decide whether maintaining a market share in the US is really worth it. The EU and Catalan diplomacy also have a role to play in negotiating with Trump and strengthening their economic position. Well, that's almost all we have time for today. But before we go, it's time for our Catalan phrase of the week. Gerard, what do we have today?
So this week's Catalan phrase is Salut y força al Canut.
Oh, this is the quintessential Catalan phrase. Even people who speak no Catalan at all probably have heard this one. It means health and economic strength.
Yes, and in fact, Canut used to be a cylindrical purse, so like kind of a wallet that people used to keep tied to their belts. And força, even though normally it's used as strength, it also means a lot. So when you are saying Salut y força al Canut to someone, in fact, you are asking or wishing them health and a good fortune.
And a lot of money in their purse. And it's also used as the equivalent of the English cheers when you're raising a toast before drinking. So, Salut y força al Canut. That's all we have time for today. Thank you for listening. Make sure to subscribe to Filling the Sink wherever you get your podcasts if you haven't done so already. Thank you to everyone who spoke with us, and thank you to you, Coralie and Gerard, for joining me here in the studio.
It's a pleasure. Great to be here.
Thank you, Beth.
Thank you for making taxes interesting. We'll be back again next Saturday with another exciting episode of Filling the Sink about Dragon Ball.
Bola de drac.
Yes. So don't forget to tune in. And on behalf of all the team here at Catalan News, I'm Beth Cohen, wishing you a great weekend. Fins aviat. Adeu.